Hello everybody, and this is our chapter on cells. Some vocab words for you. We went through these the other day in class. We got protoplasm, cell, organelle, prokaryote, eukaryote, cell specialization, organism, unicellular organism, multicellular organism, colonial organism, stimulus, response, irritability, tissue, organ, organ system, biogenesis, abiogenesis, virus, and virulence. There will be a quiz on these words, 20 questions matching for 20 points. There are 3 cell diagrams here as well. This is an animal cell, a plant cell, and a bacterial cell. You will have a test on these coming up as well, so make sure that you're studying them. And there are blank diagrams available on Google Classroom for your convenience so you can practice. So the first part of this chapter is to talk about the cell theory. Cells were first viewed by Robert Hooke in 1665 when he observed dead plant cells in cork. And this is his picture over here to the left. He drew this, because remember guys, 1665, you couldn't just snap a picture with your smartphone. You had to draw it. All right, so that's what he did here, much better than I could ever do. But once he saw these, he named these little sections cells because to him, they reminded him of monasteries where monks lived and the rooms that those monks lived in, which were called cells. Weird, I know, but that is the reasoning behind why cells are called cells. Living cells were first seen by a Dutch glassmaker called Anton van Leeuwenhoek in 1675. In 1838, quite some time later, another scientist called Matthias Schleiden concluded that all plants are composed of cells. The same year, Theodor Schwann concluded that all animals are composed of cells. So how do you remember between the two names? Theodor Schwann, it kind of sounds like swan, and a swan is an animal. So that's a good way to remember that. And then in 1855, Rudolf Virchow said that cells can only come from other cells. So these 3 guys, Schleiden, Schwann, and Virchow, they take credit for making the cell theory. The cell theory tells us 3 things. It tells us that all living things are composed of 1 or more cells. Cells are the basic unit of structure and function in living things, and that cells can only come from existing cells. So all living things have cells. Cells are the smallest thing that is considered alive, the smallest thing that gives us structure, and the smallest thing within an organism that can function by itself. And cells can only come from other cells. You're not going to get abiogenesis or spontaneous generation happening. It's not a thing. So here's what we know about where life comes from. All right. People used to believe that living things could spontaneously generate from non-living things, which is called abiogenesis, which we looked at a couple chapters ago when we talked about Francesco Redi and the meat with the maggots and whatnot. And it was ultimately disproved, as we know, by Louis Pasteur. Okay. The law of biogenesis, which is one of your vocab words, states that living things arise only from other living things. It is accepted by all scientists today, and it was, like I said, proven by Louis Pasteur using those swan neck flasks, which you see here in the picture that we talked about before. So here we go. Here are the 7 characteristics of living things. These are not in your notes. You will need to take your own notes for this. So let's talk about the characteristics that all living things have. Think about that for a second. What are some things that all living things have in your brain? Okay. You might want to say living things could breathe, living things could move, living things could, reproduce maybe. So here are the 7 actual characteristics that living things need to have to be considered alive. If you don't have these characteristics, you aren't alive. Okay. So the first thing, all living things are composed of protoplasm, which is another one of your vocab words, protoplasm. And that's an complex, ever-changing substance composed of 70% water, and then 30% of it is carbs, fats, and proteins. So cytoplasm would be an example of this, and that is a part of the cells that we are in your diagrams. All living things, second characteristic is composed of cells. So cells are the basic unit of life. Some organisms are one-celled, considered unicellular, and others are many cells, or considered multicellular. The third characteristic that all living things have are they require a constant supply of energy. So we know the ultimate source of energy is the sun, that sun's energy is captured directly by plants and then indirectly by animals when we ingest those plants, and then ingesting other animals that have ingested those plants. So all the energy ultimately comes from the sun. All organisms are capable of growth. Organisms grow first in size, and then once they're grown, they continue to replace and repair their existing cells. So you start out from one fertilized egg cell, and you grow in number. You multiply and multiply and multiply. And now that you are fully grown, most of you guys reach maturity, at least physically, in high school. Some earlier, maybe, some later. But after you reach maturity, you start to replace and repair your cells that you already have. The fifth thing is that all organisms that are alive are capable of reproducing similar organisms. Now, there are some exceptions. There are some people even that are not able to reproduce. There's some organisms that aren't able to reproduce. But to be considered your own species, you need to be able to reproduce. So humans, we are a species. We are considered to be living things. Like a pencil. Pencils aren't reproducing, guys. It's not going to happen. Living things are able to reproduce on their own. Organisms show irritability by responding to a stimulus. For example, plants show irritability by bending towards the sun. So the sun is our stimulus, and the bending is your response. You might have a plant sitting on a windowsill, and you look at it one day, and it's leaning towards the window. You turn that pot around, and the next day, the plant will be upright again, and if you leave it there, it'll bend the opposite way. Humans show irritability by blinking their eyes when someone swings at them. Don't swing at anybody. Hitting is not nice. All right, but the swing would be the stimulus, and the blinking would be the response. That's irritability. Humans shiver when they get cold. So cold, the temperature would be the stimulus, and the shivering would be the response. And humans perspire when they get hot. The seventh characteristic is that all living things have a definite lifespan. Consists of 5 stages. Everybody, has a beginning or a birth. Then you go through growth. You go through maturity, which is where most of you guys are at this time. Then you're in your decline, and then death, guys. That's how it ends for all of us. Unfortunately, we're not going to live forever. So all of us are really in the maturity stage. You hit your decline, I'd say, probably after 30, so stinks for me, I guess. And then you are in your decline, and then eventually, like I said, you die. Okay. These stages exist in all organisms. The number of years varies among groups of organisms. So a human's lifespan is actually 77 years. So think of that as you will. But, you have people living to their 90s and their hundreds. But you also have people that pass away very early on in life as well. So that averages out to about 77 years. Galapagos tortoises live an average of 114 years. So that's a very long time. A dog is about 13 years, depending on the breed. A fruit fly only lives for about 28 days. Bacteria, about 20 minutes. And oak trees' average lifespan is about 500 years. So that's a long time as well. Okay, so that ends characteristics of living things. But moving on to some characteristic of cells. Cells grow slightly in size, and then they're going to divide. We're going to have a whole chapter coming up on cell division and how this is going to happen. The volume of the cell grows. So the inside of the cell grows more rapidly than the cell membrane or surface area of the cell does. This growth is due to biosynthesis and metabolic activity. So dehydration synthesis, hydrolysis, any type of metabolic activity going on inside the cell will add to the cell size. When the volume starts to outgrow the membrane, the cell will divide to compensate that growth. So because there's only so much that cell membrane can stretch before, it rips, the cell will eventually divide. All cells are approximately the same size, regardless of the size of the organism. So a bacterial cell is typically the same size as a human skin cell. They're all around the same size. Larger multicellular organisms contain more cells, and obviously smaller unicellular organisms contain one cell. So this is a pretty cool website right here, learngenetics.com. Well, you got it here. So we're going to explore that. I don't have a link, so bear with me. So here is this website, and I'll post this on Google Classroom so that you can see it. But it shows you the size of things in relation to other things. It's very hard for us as humans to think of organisms or things that are smaller than us. So this is a good site to help us. So here is Times New Roman regular 12-point font. This is how in relation. So obviously, if you're looking at this on a computer screen, it's a lot bigger than you would actually see it. But we all know what that is. So this is just showing you things in relation to items that you might be more familiar with. So you've probably eaten rice at some point. So here's a grain of rice compared to a coffee bean compared to Times regular 12-point font. Here's a sesame seed, and here's a grain of salt, right? So if we zoom in here, we can see some things that are small, even smaller. So here we go past a sesame seed compared to a grain of salt. Here's an amoeba, a paramecium, some unicellular organisms. Here's a human egg, and you can see it in relation to the sperm here. So a human egg cell is much, much larger than a sperm cell. You can see a skin cell is right here as well. Not sure what that is. You can look that up if you're interested. We have a red blood cell, a chromosome, which is DNA inside your nucleus. There's the powerhouse of the cell, the mitochondria. Here we have an E. coli bacteria, a lysosome, which you're learning about in this chapter as well. Here you have the measles virus, the flu virus, HIV virus. So you can see just how small viruses are. Okay, here's the ribosome, antibodies, hemoglobin, which is the protein that carries oxygen within your blood. tRNA, adenine, there's a phospholipid, throwback. Glucose, a water molecule, a carbon atom. Okay, and that's the smallest we go here. If you go to another website, which I'll also post for you, you could see in relation to things even smaller than an atom, like the particles, protons, neutrons, electrons. And then you could also go zoom out and see things much larger than you. So give me a second and I'll pull that up for us as well. So here's this website. You could see a human, all right? And here's a beach ball, one of those large beach balls. Here's a dodo bird. They're extinct. A giant earthworm. Oh my goodness. I bet you never knew those existed, but they do. So here we could zoom in and see things smaller than us. Okay. Common earthworm, a matchstick, a penny. There's what a square inch is compared to a penny. Coffee bean, a grain of rice. So if we zoom out here. Oop, my bad. Oh, okay. So you can just see, once again, how small we can get here. Sleet, human egg, skin cell again, a mist droplet, cell nucleus. So you can see these things get really small. So once again, I'll post this so that you can see and look at how far we still have to go. I'm going to get out of here and we're going to go up and zoom out a little bit so we could see, yeah, how big we are. But now we're going to look like how small are we in the universe as well. So here's a human compared to a sunflower, compared to an elephant and a giraffe. And here's a Japanese spider crab, which is creepy. No, thank you. We have a T-Rex, which, you know, pretty big. Cacti, an oak tree, more dinosaurs, blue whale, a big airplane. So here we are is the human, a redwood tree, Statue of Liberty, the Titanic, Gateway Arch, pyramids, the Hoover Dam. That's huge, guys. That's bigger than the Statue of Liberty. Pretty crazy. So check out this website when you have time. It's pretty awesome.